Hello and welcome to another lightning diagram. My name is Trenton Hoshiko, and today we are talking about Monet's The Dinner. I know I always say this, but I've had my eye on this one for a little while, and I'm really excited to be talking about it today. Before we get started, I just want to point out that I have these filmmaker tools in my template right here at the top. You can get that free template for Draw.io from my Patreon. I have a link down in the video's description. While you're there, if you want to join my Patreon, I have free and paid tiers. The paid tiers help support videos like these, and you get some special things like being able to vote on upcoming video topics. The diagram itself is completely free. You can start using it today. You just need Draw.io, which is a free and open source diagramming software. Thank you so much to everybody who has already joined my Patreon. I really appreciate your support. It means the world to me. Like usual, let's take a look at this painting before we start building it out. So the main thing here is our motivated light comes from this chandelier in the middle of their, dining table. This is really fancy and really cool, and not something we see a lot of. In movies, you do see sometimes dinner scenes that have a light above the table, but it's usually not as prominent as this one. I think that would be the right way to say it. And so this light is so bright that we are actually basically blowing out the tablecloth on the top. And then that's going to be a real big key for us, is because some of our lighting itself is coming from that tablecloth. This is kind of like a classic like Tarantino lighting style, to use the tablecloth and bouncing light from the table up back into the faces of the actors. And so you get not only this kind of softened light from the lamp shade, but also this large source coming upwards. And you can see how that actually impacts the shadows on the back sides of the characters that are in this. Their fronts are illuminated and their backs are quite dark, because all of our light is coming from either the actual chandelier lamp or the tablecloth. I shouldn't say all of the light, because there is a fireplace over here. And so when we build this out, we want to make sure that we have the fireplace, and we're going to do some lighting to just get a little bit of an orange glow kicking from the right side of our frame. But it's not even creating a huge, edge light or anything on the lady here. So having that is not as important as, helping set the atmosphere. It's not really lighting for the people themselves. One thing I also want to point out is that the back of this character is still quite dark. So I think we're going to use some negative fill. And yes, there is a woman back here who appears to be a servant. She is literally blending into the wall. I don't know what more of a class commentary you can have than that, but I'm just going to ignore her for the purposes of this. Really, I want to focus on the table itself and how this lighting can work, because the tricky part is that this lamp will cast a shadow onto our actors, onto our table, and onto our scene in general. And so we want to avoid that as much as possible. Now, at the same time, it's the motivation for the light. So when you put something else into this scene that is casting light, that we're implying is being, created by the motivation source, it kind of blends in if there's some shadows happening from it, or, light is on the top of it, or, those kinds of things. It's a little bit more invisible because the brain pieces it together. That doesn't mean that we should be, lazy or not careful about this, but we do have a little bit of wiggle room. So let's build this out. Draw.io has lots of great floor plan tools. If you've watched these videos, I say that every time because it's still true. And we can just easily prototype rooms. What I'm going to do is kind of make that this black space back here is a hallway leading off into the distance. The space is kind of abstract, so if that's not exactly what it is, I don't think it matters all that much, because, we can play with the space. I'm also making this wall right here a diagonal piece, just for fun. It kind of angles backwards, it looks like. I don't know if that's just a trick of how the painting is laid out. I don't think it really matters much either way. So we have our lamp that's going to be above, and then we need to have our table. So now we have our lamp or chandelier, whatever you want to call it, above our oval table right here. Now keep in mind, we are going to be using the actual surface of the table to bounce light back up in their faces, but this is where we're starting. There are various ways to do this, but because the actual lamp and its shade and the metal on it is such a big part of this painting, and I think it shows some, elegance or, money, to be frank. Um, I think that's important to keep it in the frame. So it is a big part of this scene, and we want to make sure that it's able to be seen and it's in frame, because a lot of times what you do is you just move it up a little bit and then you have other lights off to the sides behind the actors so that you can, still hit the light onto people's faces but have it be motivated by the lamp. But because it's so big and so low on the table, you can't easily do that here. So what I'm going to suggest is that we use some tube lights, and we put a tube light all around on every side of the table. And this way, each person has their own adjustable light source right in front of them. And we would put those just outside of frame, right above where that lamp exists, right outside of the frame, so they can't be seen, but they will cast light. And tube lights are relatively soft because they're mostly omnidirectional. Depending on exactly what brand you have, most of them are omnidirectional. And so you can use that to just cast light downwards, and also, in a full like 180-degree arc on both sides of it. So that will get light onto the lamp. These will potentially create some shadows from the chandelier, but we can move those in or out relative to the actual, chandelier lamp, and control where their shadows are falling. The tighter we have them in here, the more they will look like the actual chandelier itself, but you'll need to bring those forwards or backwards, in terms of how you're mounting them, so that you can get people's exposures properly. This will also create a pretty large source that we're then bouncing off the table. This lamp will need to be on, but this is implying that you don't have enough power from it by itself, to meet your exposure needs for the scene. And also you want to be able to have control on each of these individual lights so that you can light people. There's this kid over here. If the kid's really important in the scene, you might want to have them brighter. This person's pretty dark on their backside. I don't know exactly how positive this conversation is going on at this table, but maybe this person has something that we need to imply some darkness from them, so we can turn their tube light down. Things like that. It basically gives you control while also giving you light that looks more similar to what would be coming from this lamp, but, just brighter, basically. And so that's where I would start. If we look at the guy on this side's face, he actually has a shadow on what would be his right side, our camera left, but it's not entirely filled in. It's not really dark like the back of this person right here. So I do want to bring in a little bit more light from that side of the room. This could be as simple as a bounce, and just kind of putting that back over onto them, catching some of the light from, the lighting setup that we have here, bouncing off the table, those kinds of things. I would also point out that I think that this should be mostly angled towards him to fill in that shadow on his face. The back of the child here is still pretty dark. The other thing about having the tube lights around the actual chandelier and kind of closer to it is that it helps push the light, from the center outwards, so that we get this shadow shape on the ground right here and right here, where the actual table itself is casting a shadow onto the floor. The amount that you'll get of this shadow will vary. Keep in mind that this is still, the lamp itself is basically a singular source, and by being a singular source that is a little bit further away, even though it has a shade, it's directing the light down, and so it will be a little bit more of a hard look than what we're getting with these tube lights, but you want to try to have some of that shadow, especially because it'll feel a little bit more natural. So I mentioned the fireplace before, but I just put it in. They don't have a fireplace on the diagram tools here that come with Draw Audio, so I used a sink. It'll work. But essentially, this is a motivation for this orange light that we're getting on the floor over here. And so we want to be able to have some light that matches that. The fireplace would, ideally for this be on. If it's not able to be turned on, you want to be framing it out a little bit, just to have the edge of it, and then using a lamp to create the light. But what I would do for this is just have a light that's off to the side. And honestly, what I think I would use is just an LED panel like so. And we just put that there. And that would cast enough light onto the scene to have it be across the floor. You don't need to be super bright. A lot of LED panels now have different kind of effect modes. One of them oftentimes being lantern or fireplace or campfire, depending on what brand you have. And so you could use an LED panel in that way to just create this flickering light right here on the floor, give a little bit more warmth to the scene, and have this chandelier not be the only, kind of visible, logical source of light in the scene. Back here, I'm not worried about how dark this gets because really, if you're in a room that's being lit by a fireplace and the actual lamp above the table, it's going to be dark as soon as you get outside of like that cone of light that it's creating. So I don't really care how dark the background is there. I assume the lamp shade is what's creating a little bit of the soft light that's falling on the walls. But if you'll notice, the walls actually have the light kind of fall off right about like shoulder height, which is in line with where the lamp shade is here. So when we were using our tube lights, having that kind of fall off or using some small flags can be used to help make sure that we're not getting too much of that light casting onto the walls themselves. You could use something like a big skirt that goes around the entire setup to help control how much spill we're getting on the walls. That gets into a lot more trouble and a lot more, cost. So I'm not going to put that on a diagram here. If you want a quick and easy way to do that, just get some black wrap and put it around your lights, fix it on with gaff tape, and block off parts of that light so that they're not actually fully omnidirectional 360-degree lights. If your scene is still kind of dark, what you would do then is bring in a space light, and you could put that on this side of the people. I would put it above the man on the other side, and we would just bring it in kind of close to the setup. Obviously the light's being motivated, but since this is so omnidirectional and should be soft, it wouldn't matter all that much. But we want on that side, and I say that because this guy right here, we need his back to be dark. So what I would do is bring in a wag flag or a 4x4, something of the sort, to actually help add some negative fill back in where that guy is sitting so that we don't highlight him too much. Having his tube light down a little bit, making sure his blocking is such so that we get a nice dark figure from him is important for recreating a scene like this. And our camera, which usually, or at least I used to place basically first, I'll place basically last. And so it's about right here. Notice that the angle is kind of coming top down just a little bit. The heads of the people who are sitting, we're seeing some of the tops of their heads. So we're a little bit higher than them looking downwards. And like I said, this lamp is really low. So I think that is such a powerful centerpiece for this image in the first place. And so basically, this is how I would do a setup like this. Tube lights can be very expensive, but don't have to be very expensive if you get them on good deals or different brands of them. The most expensive part of this would be actually rigging this. You would need some sort of setup most likely where you had booms that were hanging out above the table holding up those tube lights. You could do an actual grid work. That would be way more expensive. If you were really careful and planned really well and used a lot of safety cables, you probably could build a setup where the actual chandelier and the tube lights were all mounted together and hung as one unit. That is definitely something that's possible. You would just have to be really careful with that not tipping over or being too loose or, somebody running into that, whatever. That's a little bit more dangerous in my opinion. But depending on your budget, depending on how much crew you have, that might be something that is technically feasible. So there we have it. We have a way to light a scene like this, where you want to be having a really good look at the motivating light source in your room. And let's not forget how important that tablecloth will be to actually spread that light around and get it onto the faces of your actors. As I said at the beginning, I have this Filmmaker Tools template for Draw.io completely free. The link for it is down in the video's description. If you liked this video, please give it a like. Those likes really help me reach other people who also like these kinds of videos. If you're somebody who likes videos like this one and you want to see more videos about tools and techniques for lighting, cinematography, and micro budget filmmaking in general, you can also subscribe. I'd love to have you join the channel. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, take care of people around you, stay safe out there, and I hope you have a really good week ahead of you. Peace.